September 1935, this pattern of people who are going against the cabal and resisting the drive towards World War II, which is already evident at this time, the pattern of them either losing their positions or dying continues. Senator Huey Long of Louisiana, he was a Democrat populist who turned against FDR and was going to run against FDR in 1936. He thought originally FDR was man of the people, but he saw that he was part of the bankster cabal, a front man, and he was also opposed to this move to begin a confrontation towards Germany. He said, he wanted to stay out of foreign affairs. So just like Pilsudski and Lawrence of Arabia and King Edward and people we covered last week, he dies too. He's assassinated. He's shot down by a Jewish fellow named Weiss. So it's interesting. FDR once referred to him as one of the most dangerous men in America. Actually, the way the conversation went is someone said considered Huey Long the most dangerous man in America, and FDR said no. Douglas MacArthur is more dangerous. So anyone who's in the way of the agenda is considered dangerous in their view. So rest in peace, Huey Long. February 1936. The Daily Mirror. Have a look at that headline. Hitler, let's be friends. Plea to the world. And all throughout the 1930s, he's holding out the hand of friendship to anyone who will accept it. He wants friendship, good relations, both in word and in deed. It wasn't just like he was talking one way and acting another. I mean, for example, he conceded to France that disputed region, Alsace-Lorraine. He said, you guys can have it. He just wanted peace. But there's the headline. Let's be friends. And a quote, I appeal to reason in international affairs. I want to show that the idea of eternal enmity is wrong. We are not hereditary enemies. And, by this time, he is just like a superstar. Not only at home in Germany, he's universally beloved. Even the ex-libtards and lefties and commies, they saw the improvement in the German economy and the way of life and how the nation was being reborn, revitalized in such short order. He had like 98, 99% approval. Everybody loved Hitler. The only people who opposed him were the hardcore, irredeemable Marxist communists, many of them Jews, but they were a tiny minority, and also some of the old aristocratic types who truly wanted their old privileges back and to bring back some sort of monarchy or aristocracy, because Hitler's system was meritocracy. Anybody could rise up from any family if you had the ability. And there's no exaggerating how beloved he was at home. But here was the agenda. Here's what he had done. Early on, he pulled Germany out of the League of Nations. Oh, that's you know how that's going to end up. You don't get out of the New World Order. So that was a big offense. Japan did the same as well. He banned the Communist Party and he arrested his leaders. After a few years, he gave them amnesty. The communist leaders were told, if you behave, you stay out of politics, okay, you get out of jail. He replaced the Marxist trade unions with company unions. The reparations payment from the old Treaty of Versailles, which was later renegotiated. It was called the Dawes Plan. He basically said, F you, I ain't paying. And that was it. Germany was out of debt. Those were illegitimate debts imposed on Germany. He totally refused to pay them. He took control of the German Reichsbank. They issued a debt-free currency, restricted Jewish ownership of radios and newspapers. He cut taxes, gave incentives for people to start having children. And he gave the Germans back their guns. People who say, Hitler was for gun control, they're misinformed. You hear this on the conservative right sometimes. No, that was not the case at all. It was the Versailles Treaty, which banned private ownership of guns. Hitler undid that. He gave the Germans their guns back. Okay? He rebuilt the German infrastructure, the Autobahn, the highway system, upon which the U.S. interstate highway system is now based. He got that done. So just economically, morally, culturally, Germany started booming. It was just unbelievable resurrection in just a few short years' time, and people in other countries in Europe were noticing. And he had a fan club in every country, including amongst some of the elites all throughout Europe. They could not deny his achievements, but the Jewish cabal wanted him out. And the war agitation and the war on Germany. Judea had declared war on Germany officially. We covered that in the last episode. Here's the latest manifestation of that. February 4th, 1936, the murder of Wilhelm Gustloff. Wilhelm Gustloff was the head of the National German Workers' Socialist Party in Switzerland. German. And in that capacity, he was distributed the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, widely distributed. And one day, David Frankfurter, a Jew, comes to his home, knocks on the door, asks his wife if he could speak to her husband about some official business. He comes downstairs, he shoots her right in front of his wife. Murder. Dead. And, he got off easy with a light prison sentence. And at the end of the Second World War, he gets to go to Israel and live out the rest of his life. A cold-blooded murder of Wilhelm Gustloff. The German people are seeing this, and they're really getting disgusted because they haven't done anything to harm the Jews. They just took away the institutions of power, politically, journalistically. That was for Germans. But there was no oppression of the Jews. And they're putting up with this international warfare, these boycotts, and now murder of government officials. July 1936, there is an assassination attempt on King Edward. And isn't it interesting? King Edward is an open admirer of Hitler and his achievements. You can't have that because even though it's a constitutional monarchy, if the king wants to assert himself, he can remove a prime minister. He can stop the country from going to war. All right, that's problematic. He's got to go. He's a Hitler fan, and he's got a political bent. He talks about the depression and something's got to be done. They don't want that. They just want the cabal and their parliamentarian agents. They just want the king to, do the pomp and circumstance type stuff, the photo ops, ceremonies. Now, King Edward was political, so he had to go. So he had that assassination attempt. The man pulled out a revolver, and he was apprehended. August of 1936, the Berlin Olympics were held in Berlin. The Olympic Games are awarded years in advance, so it had been awarded to Germany while it was the Weimar Republic. Otherwise, the International Olympic Committee would never have given it to Hitler's Germany. But they put on quite a show, and they won more medals than any other country. And there was such a revival of the spirit, and international observers who went there, they were so impressed at the new spirit in Germany and the show that they put on. But of course, they had to take their little cheap shots in the fake news media. And here in America, the big story was Adolf snubs U.S. lads. They say he snubbed Jesse Owens, the great black American sprinter. They said that Hitler was so upset that a black man defeated his German athletes that he stormed out of the stadium. Turns out none of that was true. Jesse Owens even said later on that when he passed Hitler, Hitler stood up and waved to him. And there's two separate corroborating witnesses. You'll get into more details of this in my book, The Bad War, which you can get at realnewsandhistory.com. The fact is, Hitler actually went down there to the field and had his photo taken with Jesse Owens, and Jesse Owens kept that photo a secret for 30 years, and then he showed it to some German sports writers. He wanted them to publish it. Oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. So there was no snub. That whole story was invented, and Jesse Owens always spoke about how well the German people treated him, and he felt that the sports writers showed poor taste in disrespecting what he called the man of the hour, meaning Hitler. That woman there, that's Helene Meyer, Jewish girl. She's on the fencing team for the Olympics. Oh, how'd that happen? I thought they were just killing and persecuting all the Jews. And there she is on the medal stand. She's doing the Sieg Heil salute. She won the silver medal. Okay. But, you know, the fix was already in at this time to go to war against Germany, so they just had to keep making this propaganda, which runs totally contrary to an observation made by David Lloyd George, who was former Prime Minister of Great Britain. He visited Hitler in Berlin in 1936. He was a very important man with a very big name. He visited with Hitler, was very impressed with him as a man, as well. He was very impressed with the progress that Germany had showed. And I want to read, he came back, he wrote a lengthy article in the British newspapers. Title was, I Talked with Hitler. And listen to this excerpt from a former British Prime Minister. It was not the Germany of the decade that followed the war, broken, dejected, and bowed down with a sense of apprehension and impotence. Germany is now full of hope and confidence and a renewed sense of determination to lead its own life without interference from any influence outside its own frontiers. One man has accomplished this miracle. He is a born leader of men, a magnetic and dynamic personality with single-minded purpose, a resolute will, and a dauntless heart. As to his popularity, there can be no manner of doubt. The old trust him. The young idolize him. It is not the admiration accorded to a popular leader. It is the worship of a national hero who has saved his country from utter despondence and degradation. I have never met a happier people than the Germans. David Lloyd George wrote that. And that's just a brief excerpt. It's a very long article. You think this came from the German propaganda ministry, but it didn't. It's just David Lloyd George was blown away at what he saw. By that time already, Germany had full employment. The people were just so happy. There were programs for like common laborers and factory workers where they could go on a cruise, a luxury cruise. The people don't believe it. Look at me, I'm a simple factory worker. I was hungry and without money, couldn't feed my family years ago. And now here I am taking a cruise, in Scandinavia or whatever. It truly was an economic miracle. But this is a problem for the cabal and the parliamentarians, corrupt parliamentarians, because after a period of time, people in other European countries are going to be noticing this. Say, hey, what is he doing that we're not? We still got unemployment high up in the 20s. And they got full employment. They're rocking and rolling. What's going on here? We want that system. Couldn't have that. 1936 to 1939, the Spanish Civil War. Spain was leaning hard left communist, and the general, Francisco Franco, rose up in rebellion. And it was a bloody civil war. It was military against military, people against people. And there were a lot of outside agitators. A lot of Polish Jews came and fought for the leftist communist side. And you see them there. They are executing a statue of Jesus. Isn't that nice? They raped nuns. They murdered it was very brutal. And Franco was able to prevail. He had some air cover and some assistance from Germany and Italy. But it was a very bloody and brutal 3-year civil war. And in many ways, it's kind of the prelude to World War II, because it's patriots against Bolsheviks, globalists. October 1936, Congressman Louis McFadden, who was one of the most outspoken critics and opponents, not only of the Federal Reserve, but of the cabal in general. He was another one, used to talk about the protocols of Zion. He was going to run for president. Congressman McFadden, who once said, the truth is the Federal Reserve Board has usurped the government of the United States. It controls everything here. It controls all of our foreign relations. It makes and breaks government at will. So he's another like Congressman Charles Lindbergh back in the day. He's not only opposed to the cabal, but most importantly, he's an activist. He's got big balls, and he's got a heroic streak. That's what worries the cabal, those kind of people. In October 1936, he's traveling. He's in New York City with his family. He ate something at a banquet, got the tummy ache, the chill. He died suddenly. He's in my book. Dig him up. There you go. Anyone standing in the way of the cabal agenda, particularly the drive for World War II, either has an accident or dies suddenly. It's an unmistakable pattern. Defies the laws of mathematical probability. Cannot be attributed to coincidences. And there's some more pictures of the German recovery. I mean, everywhere Hitler went, mobs of people spontaneously showed up. Thousands of people. He couldn't even, if he was on the road, he tells one story, he was on a road trip and people started lining the highways hours in advance just to give him a cigar as he drove by. And he needed to stop to go to the bathroom, take a pee on the side of the road, but he just couldn't because mile after mile, thousands of people. It was nothing like that. It's unimaginable, the spirit of the people. You could see some of the videos on like YouTube or BitChute or Rumble. These are not juiced up by the propaganda department. He was just universally adored because he saved them from starvation, just like David Lloyd George said. December 1936. Now, we talked about the assassination attempt on King Edward, the pro-Hitler king. Well, they couldn't get him, but they got him another way. He was forced to abdicate. The king decides abdication. Now, the official bullshit story, the pretext was he married a divorced American woman, and that's not appropriate for the king. Listen, there was nothing to this but just a handful of parliamentarians and some elements of the fake news. They needed to get rid of him. How's Britain going to go to war with Hitler if the King of England is pro-Hitler? So that's the true story abdicated. It was not for the love of Wallace Simpson. No, they had to get him out. So like one after another, one way or another, they're removing anyone who could be an obstacle to World War II. Also in Asia, this phenomenon. That same month, Chiang Kai-shek, the leader, the authoritarian general leader of China, is kidnapped by mutinous generals. And there's the headline from the New York Times. Chiang Kai-shek is prisoner of mutinous Senshi troops demanding war on Japan. And those are two generals who kidnapped them. Okay? I mean, that picture's from another occasion. But it says right there in the headline of the New York Times, they are demanding war with Japan. China was involved in a civil war, Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government versus the communists of Mao Zedong, who were funded and supplied by Joe Stalin. And these ultra-nationalist generals, they invited them out there to talk to the troops, and they kidnapped them. And they even had some of the communist leaders that they were fighting come in to meet Chiang Kai-shek. And they basically told them, you're going to go to war with Japan. We're going to get Manchuria back, or those ports in Manchuria, because Chiang wanted good relations with Japan. But this was the condition of his release. When he was released, the world held its breath, and when you know it, just 3-4 months later, the agitation starts in China. China started the war with Japan because of this incident. These generals threatened him. And they told him, well, the communists will be under your command. So that, you can make up with them and everything will be okay. But it wasn't okay because later on, as soon as the Civil War ends, and we'll cover that future episode, the communists go right back to fighting Chiang Kai-shek. But that's a true story that's been buried from history, but it's right there on the front page of the New York Times. Chiang Kai-shek kidnapped. The kidnappers demand war on Japan. May 1937, the Hindenburg airship. The big German Zeppelins, huge blimps. They would fly across the ocean and fly past the Empire State Building. People in New York would come out, Sig Heil to the ship. This was like an important symbol of German engineering prowess. Just as the Hindenburg airship is mooring in Lakehurst, New Jersey, all the cameras are there conveniently. It just blows up spontaneously. And it was essentially the end of the German airship industry. And these were like luxury liners floating across the ocean. And years early, FDR, Secretary of the Interior, Harold Ickes, who was Jewish, he slapped a helium embargo on Germany. So they couldn't run these airships on helium anymore. They had to use hydrogen, which is highly flammable. Nonetheless, there were safeguards in place. A spontaneous explosion like that should not have happened. In fact, the Hindenburg had endured direct lightning hits. But they say that static electricity caused this. Now, this was sabotage. I don't know if it was a bomb or an incendiary bullet fired by somebody. The cabal blew this airship up, obviously. But Hitler had to bite his tongue. You can't go around spreading conspiracy theories. But it was a devastating blow. It's the end of the airship industry. July 1937, there it is. U.S. condemns Japan as invader of China. Drops neutrality policy to back the League. So what happened is China issued the provocation, okay, in accordance with the kidnapping incident to start the war, and then the whole world blames Japan for the war. I have a book. It's called Japan's War on Self-Defense. You can get it at Amazon, or you go to my books page at realnewsandhistory.com. You can also get, it's part of that $29 PDF package where you get all 34 books. I got all the receipts in there. Japan is not responsible at all for the outbreak of the Japan-Chinese War. That was the cabal and internal Chinese traders and Chinese communists. But there's the New York Times contradicting itself, because I just showed you a few months later. It said that these kidnappers demand war on Japan. How did that slip through? I don't know. But now they're blaming Japan for the outbreak of the war. Not true. So both Japan and Germany, which the United States and Britain would ultimately end up fighting, are totally innocent, have zero culpability for the outbreak of World War II, both in Europe and in Asia. November 25th, 1937, Germany and Japan agree to an anti-communist pact called the Anti-Comintern. Later on, Italy joins in 1937. So those are your three anti-communist powers, where Italy is not really a powerful nation militarily. Japan is, and certainly Germany is, and they join the Anti-Comintern alliance, because that's where the real threat is coming from. And Japan faces it in the Far East, because they're in Manchuria. They were given territory and bases there, as well as jurisdiction over Korea, by Teddy Roosevelt at the end of the 1905 war against Russia. And then Germany, the Germans are right there near the border of the Soviet Union over in the West. So, those are the anti-communist countries are starting to band together, joining this anti-Comintern. And, Germany had hoped for Poland to join and even wanted Britain, because that's where the threat is, that evil Bolshevist regime. But no, everybody's lining up against Germany and Japan instead. March 1938, the Anschluss, Germany and Austria merge. At the end of World War I, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was busted up. Germany was chopped up, but Austrians were not allowed to be part of the new Germany. They had to be their own distinct nation, and the globalists put a puppet government in there. But the people of Austria, they're German. Austrians are Germans. They want to join Germany. They see the recovery in Germany and the spirit of the people. They want to join their German brothers, but the globalists and their parliamentarian government says, no, you're not allowed. And we're not going to allow a Nazi party here in Austria. Now, this is a newsreel of the day. Look at the shock headline. Germany invades Austria. All the newspapers, same thing. But it wasn't an invasion. The Austrian people wanted them to come in. And they were done with their corrupt, useless government. So they just walked into zero resistance. You had like 98, 99% approval for this. So the German troops came in, and then later on, Hitler invites the Austrian troops to come into Germany as a show that this is something mutual, brotherly. And then finally, there's a plebiscite or referendum on the merger. It gets like 99% approval in both Germany and Austria. So this was a voluntary, peaceful, happy unification of German peoples. But they began spinning it as, this is not unlike how Crimea declared itself part of Russia back in 2014. Remember that? That had a 98% referendum in favor of as well. But how was that spun? Oh, Putin takes Crimea. No. Voluntary merger. And these images below, look how happy those people are. Those are Austrians. And Hitler's from Austria. And they're welcoming their hometown boy. So it was a very, very happy marriage is what it was between Germany and Austria. Now they're all part of the greater German Reich. But the dishonest spin just continues. Just hammering the public with this propaganda. Hitler bad, Hitler conquering people, Hitler invading. Now, one of the first orders of business after the merger between Germany and Austria is Hitler put Rothschild out of business. The Austrian bank, which had been established not too long after the so-called Napoleonic Wars, after the Rothschilds financed the Battle of Waterloo and the final fall of Napoleon, that Austrian bank was shut down, and the Baron Louis Rothschild was arrested. Hitler arrests Rothschild. There it is. That's a boom. And from one of these newspaper articles of the day, I'm going to read you this excerpt. But what happened is they held him and they wouldn't release him. And the British, the House of Windsor, the Rothschilds of Britain went to the House of Windsor, said, "Can you talk to Hitler and let him?" They held him ransom. They weren't going to release him. He was basically kept prisoner, but in a hotel. Eventually, they did release him, but they seized his bank. They took his money. It was, in essence, the Executive Order 13818 of the day. So, Rothschild arrested, his bank and his funds seized, and then he's booted out of the country. And when he leaves, I'm going to read you the excerpt here. The Baron left immediately for Paris, where the English, French, and Swiss members of the family will gather to hear his account of the seizure of Rothschild properties in Germany and Austria. The Baron told the Zurich correspondent of the London Daily Express that the Nazis made him scrub the floors. Oh, that's justice. Give those sons of bitches a dose of humility. They made Rothschild scrub the floors. You know this is not going to end well, though. You know war's coming now, right? That's the cause of the war right there. Hitler's war against the international banking cabal. Arrests Rothschild, makes him scrub the floors. March 1938. Now, the war fever is really building, and they've got a situation in Czechoslovakia. They got a situation in Poland, and you could just see, anyone with eyes to see. I mean, the normies were sleeping through it, but there were people who were awake at the time, and certainly with the benefit of hindsight, when we go back and read the old newspaper, magazine articles, you see the unmistakable progression towards war. And one of the men who noticed it is Lord Beaverbrook, a big British media mogul. There he is on the cover of Time magazine. Big, big name in Britain. Now, he didn't say this publicly, but he said it in his journal. People don't lie to themselves. And we owe it to the great David Irving for digging up this gem. Beaverbrook, Lord Beaverbrook says, "I am shaken. The Jews may drive Britain into a war with Germany." That's March 1938. He sees it. September 1938, the war almost breaks out in Czechoslovakia. At the end of World War I, they made this crazy rewriting of the border. And you see this strip of territory here. It's a long strip. It varies in width anywhere from 3 miles to 8 miles. It's in the south of Germany. They call it the Sudetenland. But it's all German. It's like 95% German. But why did they assign it to this new nation of Czechoslovakia? So they threw together the Czechs and the Slovaks and the Germans, and they called it Czechoslovakia. Should be Czech-Germano-Slovakia, but they left the Germans out. There's like 3 million people. And they're being abused deliberately. The idea is to provoke a German invasion of Czechoslovakia, and then Britain and France, Soviet Union could all go to war against Germany. So it's a real crisis. And it was a real chance of World War II breaking out in September of 1938 instead of September 1939. I mean, just look at this crazy redrawing of the map. It is all German territories. But they do this at the end of every war. They have their peace conference, and they'll make some crazy rewriting of the border that creates resentment, and then they can later incite to engineer a new war. But the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, he doesn't want war. Neither does the French president. His name was Daladier. So Hitler offers a nice sit-down conference. It's Hitler, Mussolini of Italy, and Great Britain is there, and France is there. And they come up with a beautiful deal. They split up this monstrous artificial state of Czechoslovakia, and the Czechs get their own state. The Slovaks get their own republics. And the Germans in Sudetenland come back to Germany. Everybody's happy. Everybody's happy. And Chamberlain comes back to Great Britain. Big, big welcome. The people are ecstatic. I mean, this is 1938. It's less than 20 years since the end of World War I. Nobody wants another war. So Chamberlain is viewed as a great peacemaker, and so is Hitler. But Winston Churchill and the warmongers of Britain and the Jews above them, they are seething. They hate Neville Chamberlain. And to this day, if you put the word appeaser or appeasement in a search engine, all that comes up is pictures of Neville Chamberlain. It was not an appeasement. It was a fair deal. Everybody got a nation out of it. But the plan to instigate a Second World War from Czechoslovakia to Germany's south was thus neutralized. So now the only way they can get a war going, to get a phony pretext, is with Poland in the east. And we covered in the last episode the convenient death of Marshal Pilsudski, who was totally pro-Hitler, and he's replaced by a bunch of warmongers. So they're going to have to wait a little while longer to get their war started. November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, Night of the Broken Glass. The Jews are still whining about this. What they don't tell you is what preceded these allegedly spontaneous riots and vandalism aimed at Jewish businesses. Here we go again. Herschel Greenspan, Polish Jew, in Paris, walks into the embassy and murders a German diplomat, named Ernst. Just murders him in cold blood. And then this triggers the riots, but there's probably something deeper. I think this was a false flag. But when Hitler found out that Jewish property and business were under attack and being arson and looted, he threw a fit. He called Goebbels up. He said, "What the hell's going on? You have anything to do?" He said, No. He gave the order to immediately stop, and it didn't last long. But there was some sort of orchestration to this. This was intended to embarrass Germany, and Hitler knew that. So that's the truth about Kristallnacht. And another element of it is this phenomenon known as Jewish lightning, where you torture business and you get the insurance money. Oh yeah, there was a lot of that going on. So this was a false flag, and it was played up really intensely in the British and American press. This is what the Germans are doing to the Jewish businesses. But that's interesting, though. Here you are on the eve of World War II, and you have all these Jewish businesses which were quite prosperous. I thought the Jews were being oppressed. No, they weren't. They were actually doing very well in Hitler's economy. The only Jews who had any cause to complain were the Marxist ones and the agitators. 1938 to 1940, the American ambassador to Great Britain is Joseph Kennedy, the patriarch of the Kennedy family. The only reason FDR even put him in that position is because you needed the Irish Catholic vote, which was substantial. But he's a very wealthy man, and he's very independent and outspoken. In his position, he tries to thwart this drive towards World War II. He wants to set up a meeting with Hitler. He meets with the German ambassador to Britain, Neville Henderson. He's like conducting his own foreign policy. He wants to keep the peace of Europe. He is anti-war. And they never forgave him for that. And that's got a lot to do with the so-called Kennedy curse. A lot of his children start dying. We're going to cover that. But they ended up hating Papa Joe Kennedy, who was Well, he actually said that the Jews are pushing America towards war. He said that privately. He didn't say that publicly. So he had this anti-Semitic bent, but he was an admirer of Hitler's accomplishments, as was his boy John F. Kennedy. So this is another obstacle that's going to need to be removed, and indeed he is. They finally get him in 1940. FDR essentially fires him. 1939, H.G. Wells, British author, The Invisible Man, The Time Machine. He's also a Fabian, by the way. We covered the Fabians in an earlier episode. They're essentially believed in one world communistic government, but only in slow motion on the installment plan, not as a sudden revolution. So this Fabian socialist in 1939 publishes a book titled The New World Order. But unlike most of his other works, this one is nonfiction. It's political. And he's openly, he has another book titled The Open Conspiracy. It's about the same subject. Because that's what the New World Order is. It's kind of like an open conspiracy. They don't generally publicize it, but if you want to read their own journals and stuff, they talk about it openly. But here's a little excerpt from H.G. Wells. Countless people will hate the New World Order and be rendered unhappy by the frustration of their passions and ambitions through its advent. And they will die protesting against it. So, yeah, countless people will hate the idea of a tiny elite Jewish cabal ruling a world where all the white people have been blended out, essentially. So he's quite open about it, New World Order. And in the very first episode, I read you all those quotes from people who openly advocate world government. Albert Einstein, Walter Cronkite, Hillary Clinton. So it's not a conspiracy theory. They openly speak about it. And that's what World War II is going to be all about. Getting rid of the final pockets of resistance to New World Order. Germany, Italy, Eastern European countries, Japan. You're going to see how it all plays out. That the foundations of the New World Order will be built upon the ashes of the Second World War. That's why he's writing that book, right on the eve of the war. Throughout 1939, Hitler attempts to resolve the dispute in Poland. Here's a couple images from my book, The Bad War. I make a juxtaposition here. Hitler goes to the Pope to act as a third-party medium. Maybe we could broker a deal together. Poland is heavily Catholic. It's true. They reached out to the Vatican to have a peace conference and resolve that situation in Poland. The way he was on his way to resolving it when Pilsudski was alive, before he was murdered. But while he's doing that, Britain, as John Bull, they reach out to Joe Stalin for an alliance. I got all the receipts on that. Read my book, The Bad War. I'll show you all the headlines. Wasn't even concealed. Britain and France were openly courting Stalin to join an alliance. So a repeat of that World War I two-front deal with Germany stuck in the middle. So Hitler is begging for peace, going to third parties to help, including the Pope and Vatican. Meanwhile, Britain is going to Stalin to join a war alliance. It's quite clear who the aggressor is. August 25th, now we're getting close. Britain and France decide to defend Poland with armed power if Germany attacks her. New York Times. And there's an image below of the Polish Marshall meeting with a British ambassador or emissary or whatever. Okay, but you have to interpret the headlines. It says Britain and France decide to defend Poland in case Germany attacks her. What that really means is, okay, Poland, it's official now. You can go start the fight, and we'll come to your aid. That's what that means. Okay, because Germany had no intention of attacking anybody. Now, Hitler sees this, and in order to thwart this British and French, and behind the scenes, FDR was involved in this too, by the way, this effort to bring the Soviets into an alliance, in order to thwart that, he offers a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, which has been misunderstood and misrepresented by fake historians. This was not a dirty deal to carve up Poland, to start the war and carve up Poland. To the contrary, Hitler thought he could avert the war, because if you take the Soviet Union out of the equation, he felt Britain and France wouldn't dare start a war on their own in the West. So that was Hitler's motivation. There was, however, a secret protocol in the treaty stipulating that if Poland starts shit anyway, then we're going to take the whole corridor, the whole Polish corridor. And then Stalin was able to extract a concession. They argued, well, we lost some territory too from the Versailles Treaty. We're going to take that back. But that was a contingency protocol. He still wanted peace. Hitler did. Stalin, of course, all along had no intention of abiding. He was just going to enter the war on his timetable. They don't abide by non-aggression pacts. So that's the deal. Britain and France give this aggressive war guarantee to Poland, and then in response, Hitler tries to take the Soviets out of the equation, makes a non-aggression pact. So the people driving this, 100%, it's the cabal, the British, the French, and FDR is scheming behind the scenes, pretending that we're neutral and we're not involved in Europe's affairs. Not true. August of 1939, there's the headline, Germany and Russia sign a pact of non-aggression, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, named after the respective foreign ministers of Soviet Union and Germany. And there's the German foreign minister, von Ribbentrop, meeting with Stalin. Stalin is only doing this to buy time. March 1939. Britain and France decide to defend Poland with armed power if Germany attacks her. British and Poles sign pact for war. So this is just a further formalization of the earlier agreement. Now it's set in stone. Germany attacks you, we're in. But what's going to happen, and this is where we will resume in the next episode, is Poland will initiate the war, and then everybody will blame it on Germany. So here we are.